Keep going.
So the long and the short of it is, as people, we need hope. We need to know that things will get better. We need to know that when things are attacking us, it will not be unrelenting forever. That at some point, these consuming powers from all sides where we look, I will get out of this. We need that. There are stories from Holocaust survivors that say that the only people to survive were the ones who held on to some kind of hope. That was what they needed to survive. I know that Lent is different for different people. For me, this season of Lent is about entering into the hardship and coming to a place where you fully realise how much we need something new in our world, how much that newness is part of God's salvific plan for us. So, to relate these stories to our passage, I think that we can draw similarities between some of our experiences of hopelessness and some of the experiences of the first century Jews. So for a few hundred years and for continuing generations, they were separated and scattered across the lands under the rule of the nations around them. Their oral traditions shared stories of this great kingdom that was under David, and the Lord was there with them. They were saved from Exodus and brought into this land, and things were great. And yet they were here in this place looking around. There were no signs of their nation being restored. When they looked for God in the temple, potentially, we see that the people sharing the revelation of God had become legalistic, and instead of offering hope and lifting these burdens, they were actually putting more burdens on them. It's a little bit of a simplistic summary, but I imagine they would have been yearning for something more and questioning if this was all there was. And so our passage starts as we reflect on that beautiful parade into the church with the palms and the singing of Hosanna. You know, we picture that. And actually, Jesus is asking his disciples to go find him a donkey. So that's like half of our passage today, is Jesus having this conversation with his disciples about a donkey. And it seems like a really weird place to start a sermon about Palm Sunday, and a sermon about hope as well, because there's actually no palms mentioned in this passage as well. A little strange. So when he came near Bethpage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying, "Go into the village ahead of you. As you enter it, you will find tied there a colt. Untie it and bring it here. And if anyone asks you, why are you untying it, just say this, the Lord needs it." And so they do that, and they encounter someone who asks them that, and they say, the Lord needs it. And then they brought it to Jesus, and after throwing their cloaks on it, they set Jesus on it. And so then that's when this extended conversation about a donkey finishes, and then Jesus begins his ride into Jerusalem. And so this donkey must have significance. Some of you may or may not be aware of the significance of the donkey in the Israelite tradition of kingship. In Genesis 49, Jacob prophesies about Judah ruling as his ancestor and says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, binding his foal to the vine," the donkey. 1 Samuel 9, where Saul is chosen to be king, is a story about Saul going in search of missing donkeys. 1 Samuel 16, where David is anointed as king, verse 20 says, Jesse took a donkey and sent it to David, to Saul. There's this Israelite tradition that ties donkeys with kingship. The story of King David on his deathbed announcing that Solomon will be king after him, among this political contentiousness, is the fact that actually Solomon will ride David's own mule. So 1 King 1 verses 33 to 34 says, "Take with you the servants of your Lord, and have my son Solomon ride on my own mule. Then blow the trumpet and say, 'Long live King Solomon.'" So the tradition is that kings would ride a donkey into Jerusalem or another city when they were being anointed as king. When they had risen into leadership, they would make this triumphant parade into the city and be anointed by the priests. So when these processions came in past the palace and into the temple courts, coming through, the whole city would come from outside. I don't know, kind of imagine it here, but everyone runs in, and 1 Kings 1:40 says, "And all the people went up following him, playing on pipes and rejoicing with great joy, so that the earth quaked at their noise. This is the parade that we see of like someone coming in, the new king coming in on the donkey, and the whole city gathers, and it's this big noise that shakes the whole earth. Something to note here is that the donkey, or mule, or foal, or colt, was associated with a peaceful rule. By contrast, kings could also make a different sort of triumphal entry as they were anointed, and they could do this by entering in on a war horse. So instead of choosing a donkey, which Jehu did in 2 Kings 9, Jehu rides in, he kills 2 leaders of Israel and Judah, and tramples Jezebel under his horse's own feet as he's entering. He is not a meek ruler coming in peace or riding on a donkey, but a fierce charioteer. These are the 2 options you can do as a king of Israel when you enter. Jehu's procession is also alluded to in this passage today, as people spread their cloaks on the ground in that scene as well. In our passage, Jesus rode along and people spread their cloaks on the road. So there is this whole tradition of kings becoming anointed as king by making these parade-type entries, with all the crowds coming in to cheer them on. And this is why the extended conversation about a donkey. This is why the donkey is so significant, and maybe that's why Luke spends so long covering this whole conversation. Because as people see the disciples bringing the donkey to Jesus, it's very symbolic and it's very significant that this is the announcement and the anointment of Jesus as the next king of Israel. And the kind of king he is also announced. It's not a war horse. Jesus is coming in peace. The donkey is also a connection to the prophecy of Zechariah 9, which says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Lo, your king comes to you, humble and riding on a donkey." The prophecy of Zechariah 9 also gives us insights into what kind of king Jesus will be. I want you to think back to that state of hopelessness that we described. The feeling of being attacked on all sides, that wherever you look, the events and people and organisations you encounter are just stacked up against you. You look to them and they don't offer any help and they are weighing you down. And any other words or images you have for that. Because this prophecy is about the judgment of Israel's surrounding enemies being replaced with the establishment of a peaceful city protected by God. Verse 1 to 7 literally lists all of the surrounding territories around Jerusalem who hold power over them, who keep them subdued. And God declares judgment against them, and then ends with a promise that Yahweh will establish a guarded fort in Jerusalem that will guarantee peace and rest for the city under God's protection. And it's very personal. Verse 8, "Then I will encamp at my house as a guard, so that no one shall march to and fro. No oppressor shall again overrun them, for now I have seen with my own eyes." God is there camping in the house with Israel, making sure no one and nothing else can hurt them. This is the plan of God for the people, that they're at peace, protected, rested. They are guarded and safe. They don't have relentless oppression. So verse 9 continues, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem. And the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth." Zechariah 9 is the prophecy of a king who brings peace and prosperity, commanding peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. And so Luke is very specifically telling us about the nature of Jesus as king, riding into town through these rich traditions of Israel. Jesus arrives not conquering as a warrior, killing and pillaging. It actually says in Zechariah, "Who cut off the chariot and the war horse and be riding on a colt instead." I think it can seem like a really big oxymoron and contrast to think of triumphant and humble together, to think of peaceful and victorious together. These things are often so opposed, and yet that's how Jesus establishes the kingdom, is through this great source of peace. It just seems it's very countercultural to what we see. Yet this is who Jesus is, and that's what the crowds are celebrating. They're waving their palms, throwing their cloaks down. Jesus is a king who is victorious, not through war, but through peace. Profoundly triumphant, but profoundly peaceful. Our passage continues, as he was now approaching the path down from the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples, having thrown their cloaks in front of him, began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the deeds of power that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven." This quote is from our other reading today, used in the Passover, and also likely used at one of these triumphal entries originally. However, Luke edits it, so it's not just the one who comes, but the King who comes. Jesus is very explicitly being praised and anointed as the new King of Israel. After hundreds of years, the stories from their Jewish ancestors, after feeling attacked on all sides, finally they see change. They see hope in this new King. God's plan for us is not that we sit under injustice, that we are consumed by distorted power, where we are continually struck down. God's redemptive plan through Jesus is one eventually of peace and care and protection. I don't want to simplify that because we don't fully grasp that now, and it's not like something magically happens, but that's the journey that we're on through Jesus. One where God camps at the house with us, personally there, and makes sure that no one can hurt us again. The battle ends and we don't have to keep fighting. We can actually rest. One significant thing I noticed missing from this procession, as opposed to the other ones we read about, is that generally kings would ride in and offer a sacrifice at the temple and become anointed by the priests. Yet in our passage, some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out." We see that the priests are not the ones welcoming Jesus in as king, and that Jesus actually has a different kind of sacrifice and a different kind of anointing to make. So, pulling that all together, we know that the burden of life can sometimes, often, weigh us down, individually with the things happening in our own lives or on a much larger scale across the world. There are so many things which tear our worlds and our world apart. And when we look around to seek help, sometimes there is only further attack. Whatever it is that weighs you down, we do need hope to get through it. And we need to know that things will get better. We need to know that our world isn't ruled by destructive powers. We need to know that we won't just be consumed by it all. And so Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. People throw their cloaks in front of him and praise him. He is Israel's new king, profoundly victorious and profoundly peaceful. We can be assured that peace and prosperity are God's plan for you. Through Jesus, a space where you can rest and flourish. The hope that Jesus brings is flourishing of life for the whole world, to bring things back together, to stop the curse, to stop the hopelessness, to stop the unrelenting. He says, "Through me, things will get better. Come join me in my new kingdom." And it is with that hopefulness that we join the multitude of disciples singing and praising, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in highest heaven." In the depths of the Lenten lament and hardship, we actually rise with hopefulness on Palm Sunday and we look towards the cross. Amen.